Morning, everybody. Morning, my name's Dani Cohen, and I'd like to welcome all of you here to this morning's media briefing for media on the subject of chicken exports. And what we're trying to do is have a conversation about, we know how important exports are in the South African economy, the influence on economic growth, the ability to create jobs and improve the current account balance. And we all know that our battling economy really does need exports. So there are some success stories already in South Africa. We've got a strong citrus export market with benefits flowing to the country and fiscus, local producers, farmers, creating jobs. But our exports of chicken have been negligible in contrast. So it's clear there's an opportunity, and what we'd like to discuss today is what does this opportunity look like? How do we do this, and what's holding us back? And today we have, I'd like to thank and introduce our panel of experts. So first I'd like to welcome Dr. Mpho Maja, who's a director of animal health at DALRRD. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. And then Donald MacKay, who is the founder and CEO at XA International Trade Advisors. He's an economist. And Paul Matthew, who's the CEO of AMIE, which is the Association for Meat Importers and Exporters. And before we start, I'd just like to quickly do some housekeeping. We're going to keep it as brief as we can and try and finish by 11 o'clock. I know everyone's diaries are very full. Our speakers, starting with Donald, will talk for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go to Dr. Maja and then to Paul. And after that, we'll do a Q&A. We're going to keep it very informal. So when it's time for the Q&A, journalists are welcome to pop a question in the chat or to put their hand up and they can ask their question. My colleague Sandra will be sending out a press release to all the media after the press conference, and we'll also be, or the media briefing, and we'll also be sending out a copy of the recording once we've downloaded it, which should be fairly soon afterwards. So without any more from me, I'd like to hand over to Donald MacKay from XA International Trade Advisors. Thanks, Donald.
Thank you. All right, let me try to get my technology to operate. There we go. Thank you. So maybe just an opening position is that the domestic chicken industry, of course, wants to grow just like every other chicken industry. The bulk of that strategy to date has been focused on import replacement. So trying to take up as much of the space occupied by imports as possible. But that's a limited market. So what you see on the screen in front of you is roughly in a year how much they stand to occupy. And whilst that may seem like a really large amount, it is nowhere near comparable to the kinds of volumes that we can look at if we're looking at exporting instead. So there's a limited amount of how much we can replace if we take over imports. Let me perhaps just talk for a moment then around what are we left with if we look at exports. And I'm sorry, this is not behaving. We start with this concept of balancing the carcass. And what this really means is that you want to look at the chicken not as a whole, which is mostly how South Africa views the chicken. But you want to look at chicken in its component pieces. So you want to say, how much chicken can I potentially send into Europe, for example, and then which bits of the chicken does Europe want to pay the most for? So if we look at the most successful exporters of chicken, they all share a similar characteristic, which is that their product portfolio varies according to the market they sell into. We don't do this. So if you were to walk into a supermarket, somewhere in the order of around 70% of all chicken produced locally is sold in a 2-kilogram IQF bag. So this is taking the chicken, cutting it up into 8 pieces, putting the 8 pieces in the bag. So these are the breasts, the drumsticks, the wings, and the thighs, and then you put it into a bag and you freeze it, and that's what you sell. And then what's left over is the back, and that could be sold in various forms, but usually just kind of as it is. And so that means inside that bag, you're obtaining the same price for a chicken breast as you are for a thigh. Of course, all of them selling at exactly the same level. And so just a few days ago, we thought, let's go and have a look at what those price variations actually look like. So if we have a look at the South African retail price, this is pulled from Checkers. A mixed portion is selling at 44 Rand a kilogram, excluding VAT. Argentinian product is currently landing into the EU, this is as of yesterday, at 71 Rand a kilo. An EU retail price at a low-end EU retailer on chicken breast is selling for 84 Rand a kilo, and at a high-end retailer at 92. Now, of course, we don't know exactly precisely what cost these retailers are purchasing the goods, but this does talk to the enormous spread that we have in value. South Africans don't eat as much chicken breast as Europe does. And this is just, again, manifests in the fact that we overproduce the chicken breast and we stick it into the bag with all of the other cuts. If we were consuming chicken in a balanced way, then this simply wouldn't be the case. You can obtain, and you can have a look at these numbers here, you can obtain a significant premium on breast, putting it into the correct market. This has a number of important implications. If we recover better on breast, then automatically we're making a better recovery on the overall bird. And breast is the largest portion of a bird by weight. So getting breast right is a really, really big deal. If you consider that the bulk of the cost of growing a chicken is chicken feed, and the bulk of the chicken is a chicken breast, then it follows that the bulk of your feed is going into creating the breast. The better the premium on your breast, the better the overall recoveries. Europe, last year, and fairly consistently for about the last 5 years, imports between 900,000 tons and 1 million tons of chicken breast a year. And this truly is a lost opportunity for us. We've been working on getting our South African chicken into the EU since 2016. If we consider what's occurred with the horror story of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, Ukrainian chicken has had all of its quotas lifted in the EU and can now flow in at full volume. If we consider other instances in the past where there have been challenges with Brazilian chicken into the market, we have not ever been able to step into that gap of what is a very lucrative market. In fact, the most lucrative market for boneless chicken in the world. And this is obviously something we need to look at addressing. Otherwise, all of our growth is going to be constrained by the amount of market we can take from importers. That obviously has limited value, particularly also because people don't want to consume chicken in the ratios that chicken are grown, just like every other country in the world. And so we don't want to eat more breast. If we did, we would not be sitting with a very large discount on breast. And you can't simply create more bone-in chicken without also creating more breast meat. And until we get that balancing act right, the imports will always be a challenge. If, on the other hand, we get our business together on exporting and we're making better recoveries, it also means we'll be able to produce higher volumes of bone-in chicken. It'll have a natural effect of just mediating the volumes down on imported chicken. So that would kind of happen as a natural consequence, rather than an artificial intervention, I believe. But there are veterinary challenges, and this really is the most important hurdle for us to overcome. This was something we've attempted to deal with before, so I'm very happy to see Dr. Maja here and hear what she has to say about this. But primarily, everything else that we can do on chicken into Europe is going to be dependent on sorting out the veterinary challenges of getting our chicken into Europe. Having said that, though, this is probably the most difficult technical market to sort out. Once we've done that, we can pretty much export our chicken to most other regions around the world. If we meet the European standard, we will meet many other countries' standards pretty much by default. So there is a lot of value in getting Europe right. And there is interest. I spent a lot of time in Europe over the last month and spent a lot of time both with chicken producers in Europe, but also chicken consumers in Europe. And there's an overwhelming sense that, number one, they do not like their concentration of trade at the moment. So the bulk of chicken entering the EU really just comes from two sources, which is Brazil and Ukraine. And they run into the same problem we do. They cannot produce more chicken breast without having markets for everything else, because Europeans don't consume in the way that we do, for example. So they have exactly the same issue. And they're worried by the fact that if something were to go wrong, for example, with Brazil, which accounts for around 70% of all of their volume, if something were to go wrong, such as avian influenza breaking out in Brazil, this would present a real challenge. They would like to see greater diversity of supply into their market. And of course, with the trade agreement, we would have a duty preference in. So this is certainly something worth looking at. And I do think the interest is real out of Europe. But to get there, we have to put in the hard work and get ready to export. And I don't think the charge here is necessarily going to be led by the largest producers. Just the other day, Chris Gitter from Astral pointed out that exports really were not top priority for them. And this is a message that they've been very clear about for a while. But I would also think that the smaller producers, those companies that are not the top two, which are dominant in the market, have got to be having some issues struggling to get into the South African market with such a dominant presence. When we had a workshop in 2016, where we brought buyers out of Europe and we brought producers in South Africa together to have a conversation about this, the producers that arrived were, all of them were medium-sized producers who felt that they were being squeezed out of the domestic market and were kind of prepared to put the hard work in to get into an export-ready position. So I think this certainly opens the door for black producers, for medium producers, for companies that are not the very large ones that dominate the landscape at the moment. And as I had said before, if we export to the EU, the rest of the world will follow. I think we need to have a conversation with the buyers. Yes, I think there's a bureaucratic process that has to unfold, and we're not going to put a single kilogram of chicken into a container until that's happened. But beyond that, we absolutely have to get our act together. We need to talk to buyers so that we can start the other side of this commercial process while we wait for the other process, the veterinary process, to unfold. Thank you, Dani. I'm done.
Thanks very much, Donald. So we can see what the opportunity is. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Maja now, but I did just want to let you all know that even though this is a panel discussion hosted by AMIE, one of the key players in all of this are local producers. And we did invite SAPA to come and participate, because the one thing we all know in the past, the conversation's been dominated around imports, but exports are something that everybody agrees on. So we did invite them. Unfortunately, they weren't able to join us today, but Dr. Maja was able to join us. So I'm going to hand over to her to explore a little bit further what the challenges are and how they can be resolved. Thanks, Dr. Maja.
Thanks, Dani, and good morning to all the participants. I am hoping that I will elaborate further on the challenges that we are facing as a country and what we can collectively do to access some of the markets. Just to start off, the primary mandate of the department is one, to control animal diseases, and that is enshrined in the Animal Diseases Act, as well as the other mandate being meat safety, which is in the Meat Safety Act. So these are the two primary pieces of legislation that we work with for making sure that the food that we produce is safe, and especially when it comes to trade, both of these come into play. We have controlled and notifiable diseases, which most of the controlled diseases become trade sensitive as well. You will see later on in my presentation how these diseases play a role. And as Donald said, these are what is actually costing us as a country market access to some of these lucrative markets. We also have international obligations as per the WTO SPS agreement. The OIE, as we all know, sets the standards for animal disease control as well as trading of animals and animal products, while Codex Alimentarius is responsible for setting standards for food safety, meat being one of them. In as much as there are WTO SPS requirements and an agreement that has been signed by most countries that we trade with, countries, trade partners set import requirements which are aimed at achieving an appropriate level of protection to their territory. So for example, South Africa has its own import requirements, and they differ depending on the trade partner or the country that we're importing from. There are benefits to exporting to the EU. Most countries use the EU as a benchmark. So if you comply with EU requirements, you generally could export to the majority of other trade partners. Besides the 92 rands per kilogram that Donald said, there's a whole lot of other benefits. But there's also a lot of work that needs to be put into us achieving this market, as I will go into later on. The other requirement that is quickly getting into the trade sphere is that of welfare. Most trade partners demand welfare standards to be applied at production level for the majority of commodities that we want to export to them. And unfortunately, poultry is one of those that are topmost talked about. We all know how we farm poultry, both meat as well as eggs, and the caging being the most that is talked about, especially when we talk egg production. So what is our role? And our role being collectively the department as well as the role of industry. The department sets standards as per the two pieces of legislation that I highlighted earlier. We set standards, we set regulations, and we also set guidelines. We also implement these through the provinces, and we also audit these standards through the provinces. We also support producers. The majority of the support, unfortunately, does not come from veterinary services, because we also don't want to be the referee and the player. So the support comes from other programs such as CASP, which the provincial departments of agriculture are running in the different provinces. We have quite a number of challenges, and I think that is why we are having this workshop, media setting today, and to also try and see how best we can address these challenges. We have a disease situation in the country that makes exports to the majority of countries a little difficult to achieve. As we speak, we have highly pathogenic avian influenza cases still being reported, both in ostriches and in our poultry production systems. We have been fortunate that most of our trade partners accept what we call compartments. These are high biosecurity establishments that do regular tests, and for avian influenza, we test in compartments on a monthly basis to give the trade partners assurances that the product that we export to them is not coming from an establishment that is infected with highly pathogenic avian influenza. We also have a challenge of complying to the regulations, both local regulations as well as regulations or standards, import requirements that are set by trade partners. As a country, as the producers, we still use a number of veterinary medicines that most countries have prohibited, be it antimicrobials, be it growth stimulants. And for as long as we use these in our production systems, we will not be able to achieve the majority of the markets. And unfortunately, the EU being one of them and being the strictest of all of these markets that we want to achieve. And then at the tail end of the veterinary medicines usage is residue monitoring. We need to monitor presence of residues of products that we used on the farm. Some countries have more tolerance than others with zero tolerance, but there's also above the medicines residues, we also need to monitor presence of heavy metals and other agents that these trade partners would be concerned about. Another requirement which fortunately does not quite apply to poultry is animal identification. I always tease my colleagues in the poultry industry that we want all chickens individually tagged, ear tagged. And yeah, so fortunately for poultry, group identification is largely accepted, and they can trace and track movements of flocks, which is generally accepted. One of the things, systems that we have discussed with the EU that they are in agreement to accepting is a split system. These challenges that I've just highlighted can be addressed in individual compartments that one have good biosecurity measures, good welfare practices, do not use growth stimulants, have full compliance with whatever measures that are required by both local regulators as well as the trade partners. And we call this a split system. It needs to be completely run in parallel to the normal production systems and full compliance, auditable, and certifiable. And the large producers are in a position to readily migrate or comply to the split system because they already are doing most of these things that are required in a split system. So it's actually quite concerning from what Donald said about one of the largest producers not being interested in accessing these markets, because if they can access the market, they then leave room for the smaller players. And not that I'm belittling them, but because it's more difficult for small producers to improve biosecurity, it takes them so much more to improve their biosecurity than the bigger commercial producers. So what is it that we can do? We can support regulation and the implementation thereof. We don't need to be policed by government to make sure that these are being implemented. So self-policing is one of those that as industry, we need to start looking into and intensifying. We should also intensify surveillance. I mentioned avian influenza earlier. It's actually, unfortunately, not the only disease that is trade sensitive. There are other diseases like Newcastle that are endemic in the country, which our trade partners do not have and are very, very sensitive to. So control measures for avian influenza, Newcastle, and other diseases, and biosecurity can actually prevent this from coming into flocks and making sure that we have a better disease status for us to be able to export our products. So in a nutshell, producers, processors, traders, government, we need to hold hands and make sure that we achieve what needs to be achieved. And I am positive that we can do it. All we need to do is put our minds to it, hold hands and move. Thank you, Dani. I can hand over back to you.
That was very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Dr. Maja. I'd like to hand over now to Paul Matthew, who's the CEO of AMIE. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Dani. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And Dr. Maja, on behalf of AMIE, very honoured to have you part of our discussion this morning. We thank you for your time. I understand, and knowing all the interactions I have with you, that you are very busy, especially around the foot-to-mouth issue. So I think, you know, it is, and also, as Dani mentioned, that I did have a chat to Isak, and unfortunately, SAPA was unable to be with us today. But I do agree with what Dani did say, that I think between SAPA and AMIE, we're on the same page when it comes to exports. As we all know, it was a really important objective within the poultry master plan. So I think we're definitely on that same page. So as Dr. Maja has outlined, there is a lot of work that needs to be done for us to really create an environment to start exporting. And I think as a country, we really need to gain access to these new markets in order for us to export. And I understand the issue around the major players and the opportunity for the smaller players to get part and understand. Obviously, the requirements to export for them may be a huge tackle to meet the requirements. But I think there must be some strategy to bring them into the net, and as a country, you know, how we can move forward. And I also think that as we focus and we look at access these markets, I mean, government plays a pivotal role here in unlocking the country-to-country trade opportunities and laying the foundation for trade. And as AMIE and as our members, I think we are really geared up and we are ready to assist local industries to be able to get a product to these overseas markets. We have the knowledge. We obviously have the client base overseas where we can open these markets straight away. So I'm just trying to get this straight here. And I think, as Dr. Maja outlined, there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of the biosecurities. And I think, you know, I mean, government has so much on their plate. And as you know, I mean, Dr. Maja is so busy, especially around the foot-and-mouth disease plans that she's putting in place to curb the disease. But I think as the private sector and as industry, we need to see how we play the role here. And Dr. Maja talks about self-policing, but to take it further and say, what do we need to do as the private sector to be able to assist government to speed up these processes so that we can open these markets? I mean, we can see that, you know, EU would need or will take up breast meats. We can see within the US how they love chicken wings. You can see when the Super Bowl games on, the Americans, I think, ate something like 1.4 billion wings. And we know that China is big in the importation of chicken feed. So these are opportunities for South Africa to get into these markets. And if you have a look at the success that the citrus fruit industry has, where in 2021, it was 1.5 million tons of citrus was exported into the international market. And there's no reason, if we get a house in order, why we as a meat and poultry sector, we can't achieve those same goals over the next 5 years. But obviously understanding there's a lot of work that needs to get done. But I think from the association side, I think what is also very important for us And as we drive this whole export strategy, and as association, we are going to really bring this as forward into our own strategy, and that is to see how we can work with all the producers to get exports going. And we're going to be concentrating on this in the month of July to see, who are the stakeholders on how we have these roundtable discussions to say what needs to be done. And it gets me back to my message saying that as the private sector, as industry, we can help, we can assist government, and hopefully not wait for government to come up with solutions, but we can then give government solutions and work together. But in saying that, I think what's a very important message here, as we want to access these new markets and we want to grow our exports, which will definitely benefit South Africa, it'll definitely benefit job creation. We've also got to treat our trading partners the same way. Dr. Maja talks about compartmental farming and the compartments that are accepted by trade partners as the South African concept. We need to do the same. We need to accept theirs on the other side, so that we have really true reciprocal trade, that we can put our products into their countries and vice versa. So I think that's also very strong in how we tie up those potential trade agreements. So I think as from the association, we are here. We have the infrastructure. We have a very strong membership. We could really add value to get South African product into the international market. We understand that we're going to rely on government to assist local producers to get their house in order in terms of the requirements, let it be from the EU or from other markets. But we are here as well to help. And we do have the knowledge and we do have the expertise as well to add value to that discussion, that we can then set up a really good export program, being just as the citrus guys, that obviously will benefit this country and moving forward. So both to Dr. Maja, thank you very much from the association side, and to Donald, thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to really concreting the strategy around exports within the meat sector and poultry sector, and to really work with SAPA to move forward to make this a success. Thank you very much, Dani.
Thanks very much, Paul. Okay, so we're going to open it up to a Q&A now. I'd like to ask our panelists to put their cameras on. And in addition to Paul and Dr. Maja and Donald, we've also got joining us from XA International Trade Advisors, Anneke. There we go. Hi, thanks, Anneke. And she should be able to answer some of the more technical questions. So, Joan, if any of the media have specific questions, they're welcome to put their hands up and ask. And I see that Ntando has got her hand up. So do you want to ask your first question, Ntando, from Business Insider?
Yes, thank you, Dani. So I've got a couple of questions. The first one for Donald. Just looking at South Africa's breast chicken production and possibly other related products, how much potential capital do you think South Africa is sitting on, by not tapping into the European market?
Well, we know that we know what the volume is they import. I mean, of course, we have no ability to supply 900,000 tons of breast into Europe. Even the world's largest exporter can't do that. But what we do know is that there is a significant price premium. I don't know the answer to your question because I simply don't have enough information from the domestic industry. But Dr. Maja pointed out something important, which is, of course, to get into Europe. The reason their chicken is more expensive is it is more expensive to produce. However, the production cost is not reflected in the price. The price is considerably higher than the premium on production. So I would guess the best outcome for the domestic industry is that they'll be able to move greater volume of breast at a much higher price than we sell in South Africa. The price spread on breast locally versus European breast is just absolutely enormous. So there is a significant price advantage. Whatever volume we sell into Europe rather than into South Africa, we would obtain a much bigger premium. So when we did the calculations in 2016, it was about a 35% at the factory gate premium on breast, and that number has increased at the moment to something probably closer to 45% premium at the factory gate. But of course, there is a higher cost of production, so we don't want to lose sight of that. I take Dr. Maja's point. But beyond that, I don't know the answer to the domestic industries side of that question. It is unfortunate Isak is not here.
Thando, you had more questions?
Sure, yes. The next one would be for Dr. Mpho Maja. And I'd like to know what your view of Europe's perception is of our meat products. And also, are you saying that South Africa has had many incidents of diseases that are trade sensitive that make it hard for us to, for Europe to have the confidence that we can actually supply them? Thank you.
If I could answer that now, Dani, accessing the EU market is actually more tricky than I think we admit. Even before we had avian influenza outbreaks, we were still not accessing that market. So the disease situation is not the only SPS being the jargon that we use. It's not the only thing that is prohibiting us from accessing that market. As I said, there's a whole lot of other things like the use of growth stimulants, the use of prohibited medicines. We are currently having avian influenza and Newcastle is endemic. So those are the two main diseases that trade partners and the EU is worried about. With regards to the perception, the few times that we have audits and we have, especially the EU auditors coming to audit us, they actually appreciate the quality of our meat products that they get to eat. And we always tease them that if you can eat it while you are here and you still manage to go back home alive, so why don't you just import tons of it? But that's a table side argument and teasing. But they do really appreciate the quality of the product that we have. The only problem is compliance to their SPS requirements. And if we can get that right, I promise you we will win this battle.
Thando, does that help? Anything else you wanted to ask?
That's all for me for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got a question that's come through to me, also for Dr. Maja. If we were to be successful in the EU specifically, what are the 3 biggest issues and how best could we address them quickly? So you've mentioned prohibited medicines, you've mentioned the diseases. I mean, I think that there's this pent-up sense that we want this to happen. The opportunity is sitting there ripe for the picking. And how do we do this quickly?
The quickest way, which unfortunately the EU also does not quite like, is the compartments. But we can offer them a split system, which is a parallel system, and it basically comprises of multiple compartments. So that would be the quickest way of us achieving this. So in the split system or in those compartments, 1, we would address the disease situation, make sure that we don't have these offensive diseases that they are worried about. And 2, a commitment from the producers that they will not be using prohibited medicines. And that commitment would also be have to be auditable. We would need to go in, randomly audit that they don't use these things. And then lastly, it would be residue monitoring, making sure that we have laboratory capacity that can take quantities that we would be sending. But most importantly, especially for the EU, is the turnaround. The EU wants a residue monitoring program that has quick turnaround, so that because the samples are collected at the abattoir. And the argument is, if you collect a sample and you get results 3 months later, that product has long been consumed. So they want a quick turnaround so that before that product, that batch is even loaded or even cut up at the cutting plant, you already have the result and you can pull it back and don't export it to us. So those are the three main things that we need to do in order to access the market. And I'm sure that we can do it honestly fairly quickly if we just get our minds to it.
Thanks, Dr. Maja. I see that Donald put a comment in the chat on this. Donald, do you maybe want to share your thoughts on what the three things we need to do and how quickly we can possibly do it?
Yes, I think there's the process that Dr. Maja described, but I think one of the shortcuts we could use would be to talk to the large buyers in Europe directly. So many of these are companies that actually run factories in Europe. They're not traders, they have plants that obviously are EU compliant because they're sitting in the EU. So again, when we've had conversations with these companies, they're open to a chat with local producers here in exchange, of course, for offtake out of those plants to help them get to a point where they deal with the kind of the commercial challenges that Dr. Maja's identified. So they run large plants across Europe. I think we should not lose the opportunity to talk to them. These are the companies that are wanting the product. We should speak to them and see how they can help.
Okay. Thanks. Paul, I see you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment on this as well?
Yes, please, Dani. Thanks. So, Dr. Maja, I mean, we as an industry obviously have cooking facilities to actually cook product. How difficult would it be to be talking to the EU partners about getting cooked product into the EU as a start? So obviously we understand all the requirements that have to be met, but obviously once a process of cooking has taken place, a lot of those are taken out of the equation. Is there an opportunity for us to maybe look at sending cooked product into Europe?
We are actually already discussing that with the EU. Of the three main issues, cooking only mitigates one, which is the disease situation and particularly AI and Newcastle disease. So the other two we still have to do. So yes, it is doable. We just need to make sure that we still attend to the other two main issues.
Paul, anything more on that question?
I would say to Dr. Maja, I think that as an industry, including the local producers, I mean, that's what we should really focus on. Say, well, how do we start that process now? How do we address the outstanding issues that Dr. Maja refers to? And it's really good to hear that obviously that process has already started, because I think that, if we get that right and we can get that into Europe, I believe the rest will flow. So I think that's very, very exciting to hear.
I've got a question that's also come through to me on WhatsApp from a journalist around if each of you panelists would mind just commenting briefly on what you see as the sort of real benefit for South Africa in terms of export, and will it have any impact for consumers? Obviously it will for the fiscus, and we've talked about that, but maybe also your thoughts around what the more general benefits for the country and consumers might be. Maybe we can start with Donald.
Well, I think there's a de-risking that happens in the industry. So you're simply more agile. If something goes wrong at the moment in South Africa, you really only have one place that you can move your product to. South Africa also, where is our growth sitting? Well, people can only eat so much chicken. And so there's benefit in getting growth beyond trying to convince South Africans to eat more and more chicken, which is going to at some point become difficult. I mean, to the consumer, of course, exports are not focused on the South African consumer, but they are of benefit to the people that are working at the factories, the owners of the factories. They de-risk those businesses as well, they create better opportunities for them. So absolutely, I think, is it going to benefit the South African consumer? Well, it's an export product. The knock-on effects may very well be more affordable other parts of the chicken. But beyond that, I think the workers and shareholders are going to be the largest beneficiaries, besides the fiscus, of course.
Dr. Maja, have you got any thoughts on this?
Yes, as Donald says, and I'll respond as a consumer first, that the benefit to us, and if half of the nation likes chicken wings like I do, we can get that at an affordable price, and for the consumer, I think that is a bonus. And very few of us really like the dry chicken breast, and let us send it out to the people that enjoy it the most. But as government and from animal health, the more we trade, the more we take pride in our health situation, animal health situation. So the more we get that improving, to a point where we could even have us sitting at home and painting our nails instead of cracking our skulls over avian influenzas and foot and mouth diseases. So from regulatory side, honestly, I think it would also benefit to appreciate the health status even better.
Thanks, Dr. Maja. Paul?
Yes, I think both Dr. Maja and Donald have summed it up pretty well. But I think as South Africa, we should just look at a poultry industry or meat industry as Brazil, and look at Brazil in terms of being a supplier of proteins to the world. And if you look at Brazil 15, 20 years ago, it was very much a mirror of our industry, and look what they have achieved. So I think, yes, it's not a direct benefit for the consumer, but I think as a country and as South Africans, there's definitely a huge benefit. And it's the pride, and it's the job creation. And I think, yes, there is definitely a benefit. And once again, just look at the benefits in the citrus industry, how they benefited from exports. And I believe we can mirror that. And yes, as consumers and as Africans, we can definitely benefit.
Anneke, I know we haven't put anything to you, but I wonder whether you had any thoughts to share with us around the potential and the benefits and some of the challenges around growing our export poultry industry.
Oh my goodness, I think the panel before me has almost said everything, but I do think that if we start exporting at the standards that other countries will accept, our local products will also be, I won't just say the better standard, but we don't know necessarily what goes into the meat that we are consuming. So I do think that will be a benefit for us if our local meat is also at the standards that internationally accepted. And like Donald and Paul and Dr. Maja said, the job creation and just the knock-on effect that this can have for our local guys.
Thanks, Anneke. So there was one question around who actually will be doing the exporting. And I know Donald mentioned that he sees the opportunity for sort of small scale farmers, many of whom are Black, which is one of the sort of our objectives under the Poultry Master Plan, is to grow that section of the industry. But Dr. Maja, you said sort of the opposite, that in fact, it's more difficult for the small scale farmers to get up to a standard that they'd be able to export, and that in fact that the opportunity lies with the large producers. I thought maybe Donald and then Dr. Maja could comment on that.
Sure. So I'm basing the conversation or my comment on a conversation I had a little while ago at that same workshop we had put together, where the reason the medium, I guess small might be not a good descriptor, but medium-sized companies could take advantage of this is by partnering with the European consumers. So when we spoke at that time, the offer on the table from some of the consumers was to be invested in the businesses. So in other words, put people on the ground with those companies to get their situation in order. So that was where we sat. The challenge you got with the bigger companies, I actually agree with Dr. Maja that it would be easier for a larger company, but it's almost impossible for a company that doesn't want to do it, irrespective of how big they are. And of course, I don't want to speak for the producers. My comment comes out of a media release, not a personal interaction. But if the large producers don't want to export, then it doesn't really matter what we want to do, what the master plan says, or what any of us on this panel say. If the business doesn't want to export, then they're not going to export. And I don't think there's anything we can do about that. But that doesn't mean there aren't other companies who really want to export. I think the conversation has to include the European consumers of the chicken so that we understand how they can be involved with this process. I mean, they're after all the people that want to buy the product.
Thanks, Donald. Dr. Maja?
I think the other thing that I can just add to that is, if we don't have the big producers exporting, the other problem is going to be that of sustainability and maintenance of the quality. Because if you source your product from multiple small producers, you end up with 100 different standards, and you are also not guaranteed that you will fill a container when the importer wants it. So it's fairly important that we bring our big producers on board. And even if it's only the big producers that export, it means that product from the big producers leave our shelves, and the smaller producers can then occupy the shelves. So everybody benefits. And yeah, that's my take.
Thank you. Paul, you're nodding. Do you want to add something here?
I think Dr. Maja just hit the nail on the head. And yes, I mean, and Donald's correct. If we don't get the big guys to export, we really get nowhere. But I think what Dr. Maja said, if the bigger producers are playing in the game of exports, and therefore exporting a lot of the cuts overseas, then it definitely allows a smaller producer to be able to fill that shelf. And I think that sums it up beautifully in terms of the way Dr. Maja put it.
Thank you. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to close by saying, what do you think, if our ambition is to kickstart as soon as possible and export a poultry export industry in South Africa, what is your priority for today? So let's start with Donald.
Yeah, so firstly, this has been, as always, an enlightening opportunity to hear Dr. Maja speak as well. I think what I'd like to see is a properly detailed action plan put together that says we're going to do these 5 things, whatever that list might be, over the next period, and let's understand who's going to do what. I'm not here trying to replicate what Minister Patel has done in his master plan, but simply saying that if we consider exports to be important, then we've got to understand what those steps are. And I don't think the full burden should be placed on government to solve the problem. So what can AMIE and its members do? What can we do to help that process along? And how can AMIE utilize its significant network into Europe to bring those consumers on board into the process?
Thanks, Donald. Dr. Maja, what's on your priority list?
I think Donald hit it well. And I honestly think we need to sit around the table, identify what needs to be done, identify timeframes, and who needs to do that in order for us to start moving on it. And I'm not going to harp on about supper not being available and missing out on this opportunity, because it is them as the producer that need to buy in and help roll sleeves and making sure that it's all done.
Thanks, Dr. Maja. Paul, the last word is with you.
Yes, so I think both Dr. Maja and Donald have also summed it up, but I think what really needs to happen, I think we need to, we're 3 years into the master plan, the poultry master plan, and a very key objective in that plan was about export. And I understand, the last 2 years worldwide with COVID, it's been a very disruptive, but I do think as well, and it's my view, is that the master plan itself has been derailed, focusing on other issues that at the time of discussion, when we sat down as an industry to discuss the plan, there are a lot of outside issues that have come into the plan that have derailed the process, and the important issues such as exports hasn't had that attention that it actually needed to bring exports forward. So my message would be that I think that whole plan needs to be refocused. I agree, let's prioritize. We do know that we need to look at the exports. I think the local producers, in terms of their own growth, as Minister Patel made it very clear on the early days of the poultry master plan, that for them to grow and not seek protection the whole time is that they need to export. And that's been lost in the poultry master plan. It just does not seem to be of importance. So that needs to be readdressed. I agree. Let's look at a new strategy. Let's have a look at what is low-hanging fruit that we can do now to start this export program. And obviously, over the next 2 years, build on the other elements to get the house in order. But yeah, I really think there needs to be a re-look at the plan in its current situation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so in conclusion, well, what we hope happened in today's discussion was that there's a reinvigorated sense of energy and commitment towards developing effectively a roadmap towards an export poultry market in South Africa, and hopefully all the parties will be meeting as quickly as possible to sit down together and discuss how that roadmap can be pulled together. I'd like to thank very much our panelists today, Donald and Dr. Maja and Paul, and to all the rest of you for joining us. Just a reminder, Sandra will have emailed a copy of the press release to all of you, and our contact details are on that press release. So if any of you would like interviews with any of the panelists, please let us know and we'll be happy to arrange it. Thank you for your time, everybody, and have a good week.